Close your eyes for just a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. The sea stretches before you, dark and endless and cold. The wind pulls at your clothes with quiet, steady force. Below you, the waves crash against black rocks, slow and ancient. And out there, somewhere on that dark water, a single wooden ship is moving. Its sail is full of wind. Its hull cuts through the waves like a blade through silk. And the men inside that ship are sailing toward a world no one has ever mapped. They are Vikings, and tonight their story belongs to you. Before we begin this journey together, welcome. Whether this is your first night here or you have been with us before, we are glad you are here. This channel is your place to rest, a place where history becomes your bedtime story. If these stories bring you peace and comfort, we would love it if you subscribed. A new story arrives every Tuesday and Friday, always calm, always waiting for you. And we have a question before we sail into the Viking world tonight. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. Tell us what time it is where you are. Whether it is midnight in New York, or 2 in the morning in California, or a quiet evening somewhere in Europe, you are always welcome here. Now settle in. Let your body relax into wherever you are resting tonight. And let us sail together into the age of the Vikings. The year is 793 AD. The night is cold and still on the northeastern coast of England. A small island sits just off the shore, connected to the mainland by a thin strip of sand at low tide. The island is called Lindisfarne. The monks who live there have lived in peace for over a century. Their monastery is simple and beautiful. Stone walls, candle-lit corridors, the smell of beeswax and old parchment. They spend their days copying manuscripts, tending their gardens, praying in the early morning darkness. Tonight, the sea is quiet. The stars are bright above the cold water. The monks sleep in their narrow beds, unaware. And from the north, moving silently across the Black Sea, 3 ships are coming. Their prows are carved into the shapes of snarling beasts. Their oars dip into the water with barely a sound. The men who row them have sailed for days across the open North Sea. They are lean and wind-hardened and patient. They carry iron swords and wooden shields, and they are about to change history forever. By morning, the monastery at Lindisfarne will be in ruins, and the rest of the world will finally know the name of the people from the north. The Vikings have arrived. Chapter 1. The world before the Vikings. Who were these people? Time period: before 793 AD. Key figure: the Norse people. Major event: the formation of Norse culture and society. What was built? A civilization of farmers, traders, and seafarers. We begin, as all good stories begin, before the beginning, before the raids, before the longships, before the legends. We begin in Scandinavia, the cold and beautiful lands that shaped everything. Scandinavia in the early medieval period was a land of extraordinary contrasts. Towering mountains dropped sharply into narrow fjords, long fingers of sea reaching deep into the land. Dense forests of pine and birch covered the hillsides, dark and quiet and full of wildlife. Rivers ran cold and fast between rocky banks, and in the valleys and along the coast, people had been living for thousands of years. These were not savages. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the Vikings before we go any further. The people we call Vikings were farmers first. Most of them spent their entire lives farming, fishing, raising animals, and trading with their neighbors. They grew barley and rye in the short northern summers. They kept cattle and sheep and pigs. They fished the cold rivers and the sea for salmon and herring and cod. They were skilled woodworkers, metalsmiths, weavers, and merchants. The word Viking itself did not refer to a whole people. It referred to a specific activity. To go Viking meant to go raiding, to go on a voyage of adventure and plunder. A man who went Viking was a Viking for that season, but when he came home, he was a farmer again, a husband again, a father again. The Norse people, as historians prefer to call them, lived in a society organized around families and clans. Each family was responsible for its own land, its own animals, its own honor. Honor was everything in Norse society. To be called a coward was among the worst insults imaginable. To die with a sword in your hand was among the highest honors a man could achieve. Their world was divided into three main groups. The Jarls were the chieftains, the wealthy landowners and leaders. The Carls were the free farmers, the backbone of Norse society. And the thralls were the slaves, captured in raids or born into servitude. The Norse world was organized not by kings with absolute power, but by local things. A thing was an assembly, a gathering of free men to discuss disputes, make laws, and settle grievances. The most famous of these was the Althing in Iceland, established in 930 A.D. It is considered one of the world's oldest parliaments. Norse women, while not equal to men in the modern sense, had considerably more rights than most women in medieval Europe. They could own property. They could divorce their husbands. They could run the farm and household in their husband's absence, which was often very long. Some women, known as shield maidens, reportedly fought alongside men. The evidence for this is disputed, but the Norse sagas are full of formidable women who defied expectations. The Norse people believed in a rich and complex mythology. Their universe was divided into 9 worlds, held together by the great ash tree Yggdrasil. At the center of all things was Asgard, the home of the gods. Odin was the All-Father, the chief of the gods, the god of wisdom and war and death and poetry. He sacrificed one eye at the well of Mimir to gain the wisdom of the universe. He hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days to learn the secret of the runes. Thor was his son, the god of thunder, the protector of mankind. His hammer Mjolnir was the most powerful weapon in the 9 worlds. Freya was the goddess of love and war and magic, the most beautiful of all the goddesses. These gods were not distant, perfect beings. They were complicated and flawed, and sometimes terrifyingly powerful. They felt almost human, because they were born from a human imagination trying to make sense of a world full of storms and sea and darkness and death. The Norse world was also a world of trade. Long before the raids began, Norse merchants were traveling across Europe and into the East. They traded furs and amber and walrus ivory for silver and silk and spices. They established trading towns along the rivers of Russia, following the waterways deep into the continent. The city of Kiev in modern Ukraine owes much of its early development to Norse traders, the Varangians, who settled there in the 9th century. So when we think about what caused the Viking Age to begin, we must understand that the foundation was already there. A seafaring people, skilled navigators, experienced traders, organized into competitive clans with a warrior culture that valued courage and adventure above almost anything else. All they needed was a reason to expand, and that reason, when it came, changed the world forever. The Longship rests on the dark water tonight. Its sails are furled, its crew sleeps. The stars above Scandinavia are cold and bright and impossibly distant, and history waits in the darkness, patient as the sea itself. As you rest now, warm and still, we move forward gently into the age that would shake the world awake. Chapter 2. The Longship, the most perfect machine of the Middle Ages. Time period, 700s to 1100s AD. Key figure, Norse shipbuilders. Major event, the development of the Longship. What was created? The vessel that made the Viking Age possible. There is an object that made the Viking Age possible. Without it, everything we are about to explore tonight would never have happened. The raids would never have reached England. The colonies would never have been planted in Iceland and Greenland. The shores of North America would never have felt a Norse footstep. That object is the Longship, and it is, by almost any measure, the most extraordinary vessel ever built before the age of modern engineering. Let us look at it together. The Longship is long and narrow, built of overlapping planks of oak, each one carefully shaped and fitted. This construction technique is called clinker-built or lapstrake. The overlapping planks give the hull a flexibility that solid-built ships do not have. In the open ocean, when a great wave strikes a longship, the hull bends slightly with the force. Then it springs back. This flexibility makes the ship almost impossible to sink in rough seas. The hull is shallow, barely a meter deep. This means a longship can sail in water so shallow that a man could wade in it. A longship can sail up a river as easily as across the open ocean. It can be dragged onto a beach and launched again within minutes. It can even be carried overland by its crew, rolled on logs from one river to another. The longship is reversible. There is no bow and stern in the traditional sense. The ship can be rowed in either direction equally well. In a tight harbor or a narrow river, the crew can simply reverse without turning the ship around. The sail of a longship is typically a large square sail made of wool, sometimes reinforced with strips of leather in a diamond pattern. When the wind is favorable, the crew raises the sail and rests. When the wind is unfavorable, they lower the sail and row. A longship with a full crew of 30 men can achieve speeds of 15 or 16 knots under sail. That is faster than many modern sailboats. The ships also had a carved wooden figure on the prow, a dragon or a serpent or a beast of some kind. These were not merely decorative. They were believed to have protective power, to frighten away the spirits of the sea. When approaching a friendly harbor, the Norse sailors would remove the prow figure, so as not to frighten the land spirits with their sea spirit. The Longship had one more quality that made it utterly revolutionary. It was silent. An army that marched over land could be heard and seen from miles away. A fleet of longships moving at night, with their sails furled and their oars muffled with cloth, could appear with almost no warning. This is exactly what happened at Lindisfarne in 793. The monks did not hear them coming. They did not see them until the ships were already on the beach. The Longship gave the Norse people something no other people in medieval Europe possessed: the ability to strike anywhere, at any time, without warning, and the ability to escape before any response could be organized. The sea was their road, and their road went everywhere. Modern archaeologists have found numerous well-preserved Viking ships. The most famous is the Oseberg ship, discovered in Norway in 1904. It was buried in a burial mound around 834 AD, serving as the grave of two women of high status. One of them may have been a queen or a powerful priestess. The ship itself is extraordinarily beautiful. Its prow curves upward in an elegant spiral, carved with intricate knotwork patterns. Every surface that could be decorated has been decorated. This was not a rough, practical vessel. This was a work of art. Standing before it in the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo today, visitors often fall silent, not because they are tired, but because beauty that old has a weight to it, a gravity. It pulls you toward it and holds you there. The Oseberg ship is over 1,000 years old, and it is still one of the most beautiful objects human hands have ever made. The Longship rests in the museum now, still and quiet. Its wood dark with the weight of centuries, its carved prow pointing at nothing and everything. The sea it once sailed is far away and very old, and the hands that built it have long since returned to the earth. As your hands rest now, warm and still, history whispers, and you listen. Chapter 3. The First Raids. Terror from the Sea. Time period: 793 to 850 AD. Key figure: unknown Norse raiders. Major event: the raid on Lindisfarne and the beginning of the Viking Age. What was destroyed? The safety of the European coastline. We arrive now at the moment that changed everything. The summer of 793 AD. The monastery at Lindisfarne, off the northeastern coast of England. We have been here before, at the very beginning of our story, but now let us slow down. Let us look more carefully at this moment and understand what it truly meant. The monastery at Lindisfarne was not merely a religious building. It was a center of learning, one of the most important in all of England. The monks there had spent generations copying manuscripts, preserving the knowledge of the ancient world in careful, beautiful handwriting. They had produced the Lindisfarne Gospels, one of the great masterpieces of medieval art, an illuminated manuscript of extraordinary beauty. The monastery was also wealthy in gold and silver altarpieces, in jeweled book covers, in fine cloth and precious objects brought by pilgrims from across Europe, and it was completely undefended. There were no walls, no soldiers, no weapons. Why would there be? It was a monastery on a small island. Who could possibly threaten it? The men who stepped off those longships onto the beach at Lindisfarne that June morning were probably not thinking about history. They were thinking about silver, about gold, about taking what they needed and getting back to their ships before anyone could stop them. They moved through the monastery quickly and efficiently. They took everything of value they could carry. They killed some of the monks. They took others as slaves. They burned what they could not take. And then they were gone, back onto the sea, back into the north. The surviving monks were left with their ruined monastery, their dead brothers, and a terror that would spread across Europe with remarkable speed. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, one of the most important historical documents of medieval England, records the event in stark terms. The pagans from the Northlands came and made a grievous slaughter of the people of God in Lindisfarne. News of the attack spread rapidly. A scholar named Alcuin, one of the most learned men in Europe, wrote a letter describing his horror. He could not believe that such a thing was possible, that a holy place could be attacked without warning, that men could come from the sea without any sign or preparation. But possible it was, and it would happen again and again and again. The raids that followed Lindisfarne established a pattern that would terrify Europe for the next 2 centuries. Small groups of Norse raiders, typically between 1 and 5 ships, would identify a target, a coastal monastery, a wealthy trading town, a poorly defended settlement. They would arrive without warning, move quickly, take everything valuable, and leave before any organized defense could be assembled. The raids were surgical and fast. The Norse raiders were not interested in conquest at this stage. They were interested in portable wealth, silver and gold and slaves, things that could be loaded onto a ship and sailed home. The impact on the European psyche was profound. A prayer began to appear in church services across England and France. From the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord. The sea, which had always been a boundary, a natural barrier that protected coastal communities, had become a highway for terror. Nowhere that could be reached by water was safe, and rivers penetrating deep into the interior of every European country, almost everywhere could be reached by water. The Norse raiders discovered this quickly. They sailed up the Seine to attack Paris. They sailed up the Loire to attack Tours. They sailed up the Thames, the Elbe, the Rhone. They reached the Mediterranean. They attacked Spain, Portugal, Italy. They traveled further and struck harder than anyone in Europe had imagined possible. The raids continued and intensified through the early 9th century. Every summer, when the seas were calm enough for the longships, the raids would come. Every winter, when the storms made sailing dangerous, there would be a brief and fearful peace. European kings and church leaders struggled to respond. They built watchtowers on the coasts. They stationed soldiers at river crossings. They paid enormous ransoms in silver to make the raiders go away, a payment the English called Danegeld. Sometimes it worked temporarily, but the raiders always came back, because the silver they were being paid to leave simply gave them more resources for the next season's raids. And so, something was changing. The raids were becoming something larger, something more permanent. The Norse people were not simply raiding anymore. They were beginning to settle. The night wind moves across the sea. The longships are out there still, somewhere in the darkness, but they are moving more slowly now, looking not for things to take, but for places to stay. And so the raids rested in their season, as you rest now. The sea grows quieter. We move forward into the age of settlement.
Chapter 4: The Great Heathen Army, when the Vikings came to stay. Time period 865 AD to 878 AD. Key figure: Ragnar Lothbrok's sons, Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, and Ubba. Major event: the invasion and occupation of England. What changed? England itself, permanently. We move forward now, gently, into a darker chapter. The year is 865 AD. A fleet of longships arrives on the eastern coast of England. This is not a raiding party, it is an army. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle calls it the Great Heathen Army. Modern historians estimate it may have contained between 1,000 and several thousand warriors. This is not men coming to take silver and leave. This is men coming to take land. The leader of this army, or one of its principal leaders, is a man named Ivar. He is called Ivar the Boneless, though no one is entirely certain why. Some historians think it refers to extreme flexibility, suggesting he was a skilled acrobat or wrestler. Others suggest it may refer to a disability of some kind. Some believe it was simply a kenning, a poetic nickname with no literal meaning. Whatever its origin, the name stuck, and Ivar the Boneless was one of the most formidable military commanders of the 9th century. According to Norse sagas, Ivar and his brothers were the sons of a legendary Viking king named Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar himself is a semi-mythological figure, part history and part legend, who supposedly raided Paris and was eventually captured and executed by the Northumbrian king Ella, who threw him into a pit of venomous snakes. Whether or not Ragnar was a real person, his sons were very real, and according to the sagas, they came to England to avenge their father's death. The Great Heathen Army moved through England with ruthless efficiency. They captured the city of York in 866 AD, making it their base of operations. They called it Jorvik, and under Norse rule, Jorvik would become one of the most important trading cities in all of northern Europe. Archaeologists excavating beneath the streets of modern York have found extraordinary evidence of Viking life there. A site called Coppergate has yielded thousands of everyday objects: leather shoes and wooden cups, combs made from antler bone, children's toys, evidence of metalworking, leatherworking, wood turning, textile production. The Norse settlers of Jorvik were not barbarians living in crude huts. They were skilled craftspeople living in a thriving urban community. From York, the Great Heathen Army spread across England. They defeated and killed the kings of Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia. King Edmund of East Anglia was captured by the army around 870 AD. When he refused to renounce his Christian faith and share his kingdom with the Norse leaders, he was tied to a tree, shot full of arrows, and beheaded. He was later made a saint. By 878 AD, the Norse army controlled most of England. The only remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdom was Wessex in the southwest, and its king was a young man named Alfred. Alfred of Wessex would one day be called Alfred the Great, but in the winter of 878 AD, he was a king in hiding. Driven from his palace by the Norse forces under a leader named Guthrum, Alfred took refuge in the marshes of Somerset. There is a famous, though probably legendary story from this period. Alfred was sheltering in the hut of a peasant woman who asked him to watch some cakes baking by the fire. Distracted and troubled by his kingdom's fate, Alfred let the cakes burn.
The woman, not knowing she was scolding his king, berated him sharply. Whether or not the story is true, it captures something real about Alfred's situation. He was a king without a kingdom, sheltering in secret, trying to find a way to save his people. But Alfred was not defeated. He was planning. In the spring of 878 AD, Alfred emerged from the marshes and called his fighting men together. At the Battle of Edington, Alfred's army met Guthrum's forces and won a decisive victory. The terms of peace that followed were significant. Guthrum agreed to be baptized as a Christian. Alfred stood as his godfather at the baptism, and England was formally divided. The north and east, the area known as the Danelaw, remained under Norse control. The south and west remained Anglo-Saxon. This division would shape England for generations. Many English place names ending in by, Thorpe, Thwaite are Norse in origin. Derby, Grimsby, Scunthorpe, Whitby. Every time you read one of these names on a map, you are reading the permanent mark the Norse settlers left on the English landscape. The army rests now on its captured land. Its swords are set aside for the season. Its leaders are thinking about farms and families now, about the land they have won. As you rest now in the warmth of this night, history breathes slowly around you. We move forward into the wider world the Vikings were sailing toward.
Chapter 5. Dublin, Normandy, and the Norse world in the west. Time period 840 AD to 1000 AD. Key figure, Rollo of Normandy. Major event, Norse settlements across Western Europe. What was founded, Dublin, Normandy, and a new European identity. The Norse raiders and settlers were not only looking at England. Their longships were moving in every direction. South along the coast of France, around the Iberian Peninsula into the Mediterranean, west across the open Atlantic to islands no European had ever seen. In Ireland, Norse raiders had been attacking coastal monasteries since the late 8th century. But around 840 AD, something changed. The Norse began to overwinter in Ireland, building fortified camps on the coast rather than sailing home each autumn. From these winter camps, they controlled the surrounding territory and launched raids deeper into the Irish interior. One of these winter camps, built on the banks of the River Liffey on the east coast of Ireland, would grow into one of Europe's great cities. Its Norse name was Dyflin. We know it today as Dublin. For 2 centuries, Dublin was a Norse city. Its kings were Norse. Its language was Norse. Its trade networks connected it to Norway and Iceland and the wider Norse world. Even after the Norse political power in Ireland faded, the city they founded remained. Modern Dublin owes its existence to those winter camps on the Liffey. In France, the Norse raids had been causing devastation for decades. Paris itself had been besieged twice. In 885 AD, a Norse fleet of perhaps 700 ships and 30,000 warriors surrounded the city. The siege lasted almost a year. The Frankish king, Charles the Simple, whose name tells you something about his reputation, finally tried a different approach. In 911 AD, Charles negotiated a treaty with a Norse chieftain named Rollo. Charles offered Rollo a large territory in northern France to be his own to rule, on condition that Rollo defend the coast against further Norse raids. Rollo accepted.
He converted to Christianity. He took a Frankish wife. He became a Frankish duke in all but name. The territory he received was called Normandy, the land of the Northmen. Rollo's descendants would rule Normandy for generations, and one of those descendants, his great-great-great-great-grandson, William, Duke of Normandy, would, in 1066 AD, cross the English Channel with an army and conquer England. The Battle of Hastings, the Norman Conquest, one of the most famous events in English history. The Normans were, in the most direct sense, Vikings, 3 generations removed from the Longships, speaking French now rather than Norse, Christian rather than pagan, but descended in an unbroken line from the raiders who had terrorized the coasts of France for a century. The Viking Age reached farther than the raiders ever knew. Its consequences stretched centuries beyond its own ending. In the Mediterranean, Norse warriors known as Varangians served as elite mercenary soldiers. The Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Empire, based in Constantinople, was composed largely of Norse warriors. They were considered the most reliable soldiers in the Byzantine army, fierce, disciplined, loyal to whoever paid them. The Emperor of Byzantium trusted them above all others precisely because they had no political loyalties to any Byzantine faction. They were strangers in that world, and their strangeness was their reliability. Norse graffiti has been found carved into the marble railing of the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. A man named Halfdan scratched his name into one of the world's greatest buildings more than 1,000 years ago. He was there. He wanted someone to know he had been there. We know. The wide world rests quietly now, its many harbors holding the memory of wooden ships, its coastlines still carrying the Norse names given to them long ago. You are resting too. Your breathing is slow and easy. The night moves gently around you. We sail westward now into the open Atlantic, into the chapter of the greatest voyages in human history. Chapter 6: Iceland and Greenland. Sailing into the unknown. Time period 870 to 1000 AD. Key figure Eric the Red. Major event the Norse colonization of Iceland and Greenland. What was found? New worlds at the edge of the known Earth. Imagine sailing west from Norway in an open wooden boat. No map, no compass, no satellite navigation, no radio. Nothing but the stars above and the ocean below and the knowledge carried in your head and in your hands. This is what the Norse explorers did, and they did it with a calm confidence that still astonishes historians. They navigated by the sun and the stars. They read the color and temperature of the water. They watched the flight patterns of birds. They observed the behavior of sea mammals who congregate near land. They used a device called a sun shadow board to track the sun's position. They may have used a mysterious object called a sunstone, a piece of Iceland spar crystal that can reveal the position of the sun even through cloud cover. With these tools and with accumulated generations of knowledge passed from sailor to sailor, they found their way across the open ocean. Iceland was discovered by Norse settlers, or perhaps rediscovered since Irish monks may have been there earlier, around 870 AD. The first permanent settlers arrived in 874 AD. Their leader was a Norwegian named Ingolf Arnarsson. According to the sagas, as his ship approached the Icelandic coast, Ingolf threw his carved wooden high-seat pillars overboard and vowed to settle wherever they washed ashore. The pillars were found near a bay on the southwestern coast. He named the place Reykjavik, Bay of Smoke, for the steam rising from the geothermal vents nearby. Reykjavik is still Iceland's capital today. Iceland filled quickly with Norse settlers, many of them escaping the increasingly centralized power of the Norwegian king Harald Fairhair. A man who would not bow to a king went to Iceland instead, where there was no king, only the Althing, the assembly of free men. By 930 AD, Iceland had a population of perhaps 20,000 people. They had established farms across the island. They had created the Althing. They had begun writing down their stories and history in a literary tradition that would produce some of the greatest works of medieval literature, the Icelandic sagas. These long, careful narratives of family history and heroic deeds are the primary source for much of what we know about the Viking Age. They are also remarkable works of literature in their own right, clear-eyed and unsentimental, full of complex characters making difficult choices in a hard world. But Iceland was not the end of Norse expansion. There was a man in Iceland around 980 AD named Eric. He was a large, red-haired, hot-tempered man who had already been exiled from Norway for manslaughter, and now he had been exiled from Iceland for the same reason. He had 3 years of exile to fill, so he sailed west, into waters no one reliably mapped, into the unknown. He found a large island, largely covered in ice, yes, but with green valleys and fjords along its southern and western coasts, where grass grew and animals could be grazed. He spent 3 years exploring it, and when his exile was over and he returned to Iceland, he gave the island an enticing name, Greenland. A name chosen, the sagas say, with gentle humor, because he thought people would be more likely to go there if the land had a good name. It worked. 25 ships set out from Iceland to colonize Greenland. 14 arrived. The others were lost to storms and sea. But 14 was enough. Norse colonies were established in Greenland. They would survive for nearly 500 years. Eric the Red settled in Greenland and lived there until his death. His son, Leif, would sail even further west, but that story belongs to the next chapter. For now, let us rest here on the shores of Greenland. The sky is enormous and pale and cold. The ice in the fjord is blue-white and ancient. The silence is so deep you can hear your own heartbeat. This is the edge of the world as the Norse people knew it, and beyond it, something was waiting, something they had not yet found. As you rest at your own quiet edge tonight, warm and safe and still, history holds you gently. We move forward.
Chapter 7. Vinland, the discovery of America. Time period, around 1000 AD. Key figure, Leif Erikson. Major event, Norse contact with North America. What was found? A continent 500 years before Columbus. This is perhaps the most quietly extraordinary chapter of the entire Viking Age. The year is approximately 1000 AD. A man named Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, sails west from Greenland. He is following a report from a man named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had been blown off course years earlier and had glimpsed land to the west without landing.
Leif lands on that western shore. He explores it. He finds a land of vast forests and wide rivers and wild grapes growing in the valleys. He names it Vinland, land of wine or land of meadows. Scholars still debate the exact meaning. And in doing so, he becomes the first European in recorded history to set foot on the continent of North America. This happened approximately 500 years before Columbus. For a long time, the Vinland sagas were considered more legend than history. A good story, perhaps, but probably not literally true. Then, in 1960, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife Ann Steen began searching the coast of Newfoundland in eastern Canada. They were looking for physical evidence of the Norse settlement described in the sagas. At a place called Longship on the northern tip of Newfoundland, they found it. The remains of 8 Norse-style turf buildings, a bronze cloak pin of Norse design, a spindle whorl suggesting the presence of women, a small smithy for working iron, which was not known to the indigenous peoples of the area. Longship is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is the only confirmed pre-Columbian European settlement in North America. The Norse were here. 1,000 years ago, men and women from Scandinavia walked on the soil of North America. They ate fish from American rivers. They cut timber from American forests. They breathed American air. The sagas suggest that multiple voyages were made to Vinland. An attempt was made to establish a permanent colony. But the Norse encountered the indigenous people of the area, whom they called the Skraelings, a word whose exact meaning is unclear but carries a dismissive tone. Initial contacts were cautious, involving some trade, but violence eventually broke out. The Norse settlers, few in number and far from home, could not sustain a colony against sustained resistance from the local population. They abandoned Vinland and returned to Greenland. North America would not be permanently settled by Europeans for another 500 years. What might have happened if the Norse had succeeded? If they had established a permanent colony as they had in Iceland and Greenland? It is one of history's great unanswerable questions. The world might look very different today. But they did not stay. They left, and the continent they briefly touched resumed its own history undisturbed. Only at Longship in the cold wind off the Labrador Sea does the evidence remain. Those turf walls, that bronze pin, the memory of fires burning in a place where no European fire had burned before, and where none would burn again for 5 centuries. The wind off the Atlantic is very cold tonight. The stars above Newfoundland are sharp and clear, and somewhere beneath the soil of that quiet peninsula, the memory of those first visitors is still resting. As you rest now, deeply and peacefully, history whispers across the water, and you listen.
Chapter 8. The Norse in the East, the Varangian Road. Time period 800 to 1000 AD. Key figure, Rurik of Novgorod. Major event, Norse expansion into Russia and Byzantium. What was built? The foundations of the Russian state. We turn now from the cold Atlantic to a different direction entirely, east. While some Norse adventurers were sailing west into the unknown ocean,
Others were sailing east and south into the vast interior of the European continent. They followed the great rivers, the Volga, the Dnieper, the Don. These rivers were ancient trade routes used for centuries by the peoples of the steppes and forests. But the Norse, with their shallow drafted ships and their willingness to portage overland between rivers, traveled them more systematically than anyone had before. They were looking for trade. Specifically, they were looking for silver. The Islamic world, centered in Baghdad, was fabulously wealthy in the 9th and 10th centuries, and it wanted what the Norse had access to: furs, amber, walrus ivory, and slaves. The Norse brought these goods south and east along the river routes. In exchange, they received enormous quantities of Arabic silver coins called dirhams. Archaeologists have found thousands of Arabic dirhams buried in Scandinavian soil. More Arabic silver coins have been found in Scandinavia than almost anywhere else in the world. The silver flowed north along those river roads for 2 centuries. Along these trade routes, Norse settlers established towns and trading posts. They mixed with the Slavic, Finnish, and Baltic peoples they encountered. They adopted local customs and languages, even as they introduced their own. A Norse chieftain named Rurik, according to the primary chronicle, the oldest history of Russia, was invited to rule over the city of Novgorod around 862 AD. Whether this is literally true is debated, but the Norse presence in that region is archaeologically confirmed. Rurik's descendants would found the Rurikid dynasty that ruled Russia for 7 centuries. The very name Russia is believed to derive from Rus, a word of disputed origin that was applied to the Norse traders and settlers in the region. The city of Kiev on the Dnieper River became the center of a powerful Norse Slavic state. Kievan Rus would be the precursor of both modern Russia and modern Ukraine. At the south end of the Dnieper, the Norse traders reached the Black Sea. And beyond the Black Sea lay the greatest city in the medieval world, Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The city the Norse called Miklagard, the Great City. When Norse traders and adventurers first arrived in Constantinople, the Byzantine authorities were initially wary, but they quickly recognized the value of these fierce Norse warriors. The Varangian Guard was established, a regiment of Norse and later Anglo-Saxon warriors who served as the personal bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor. The Varangians were trusted precisely because they were outsiders. They had no stake in Byzantine court politics. They owed everything to the emperor personally. They were paid extraordinarily well by the standards of the time. A Varangian guardsman might earn in a year what a Norse farmer earned in a decade. Service in the Varangian Guard became a path to wealth and fame for ambitious young Norse men. The sagas are full of characters who went east to serve in Constantinople and returned home rich and celebrated. One of the most famous Varangians was Harald Hardrada, who would later become king of Norway. He served in the Varangian Guard for years, fighting across the Byzantine world, from the Caspian Sea to the Mediterranean. He accumulated enormous wealth and military experience. In 1066 AD, he launched his own claim to the English throne, sailing with a large army to Yorkshire. He was defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge just 3 weeks before William of Normandy landed in the south. 2 Viking descendants fighting over England in the same fortnight. The the last great act of the Viking Age, playing out on an English battlefield on a late September day. The eastern road grows quiet now. The rivers are dark and slow. The great city of Constantinople glows on the horizon, golden and distant. The Varangians sleep in their barracks near the palace. Their swords are at their sides. Their shields hang on the wall. They are dreaming of home, of cold rivers and pine forests, of the sea. As you are drifting now slowly toward your own quiet place, we move forward into the world of the Norse gods and the stories they told.
Chapter 9. Norse Mythology, the Gods, the Giants, and the End of the World. Time period, throughout the Viking Age. Key figure, Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki. Major event, the Norse mythological tradition. What was imagined, a complete vision of the universe and its ending. We pause now in the middle of our journey. We sit by a fire that has been burning for 1,000 years. The flames are low and warm and golden. The darkness outside is absolute. And in this pause, we listen to the stories the Norse people told themselves, the stories that explained their world, the stories that gave their lives meaning. At the center of Norse mythology is a tree, Yggdrasil, the world tree, an enormous ash tree whose roots and branches connect all of existence. Its 3 roots reach into 3 different worlds. One root reaches into Asgard, the home of the gods. One reaches into Jotunheim, the land of the giants. One reaches into Niflheim, the land of the dead. In the well beneath one root, the Norns sit weaving the fate of every living being. 3 women called Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld. Past, present, and future. Their weaving cannot be undone, not even by the gods. Odin, the All-Father, ruled from his great hall Valhalla. This golden hall had 540 doors, each wide enough for 800 warriors to march through side by side. Its walls were made of spears. Its roof was thatched with golden shields. Every day, the warriors who had died in battle were brought to Valhalla by the Valkyries, women warriors who rode through the sky above battlefields, choosing who would live and who would die. In Valhalla, the dead warriors fought each other all day, dying and being reborn, practicing for the final battle. At night, they feasted, drinking mead from the horns and eating the flesh of a great boar that was cooked and eaten and reborn every night. This was Odin's gift to the dead warriors, eternal preparation for what was coming. Because Odin knew what was coming. He was the wisest of the gods, and his wisdom carried a terrible burden. He knew that the universe had an ending. He called it Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. At Ragnarok, the bonds would break. Loki, the trickster god, imprisoned beneath a mountain for the crime of causing the death of Baldur, the most beloved of the gods, would break free. The great wolf Fenrir, chained since his birth because the gods feared his power, would burst his bonds. The world serpent Jormungandr, so large that it encircled the entire earth with its body, would rise from the ocean. The dead of Hell's realm would sail on a ship made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead. And the fire giant Surt would come from the south, his sword blazing with the brightness of the sun. The gods would fight. Thor would kill the world serpent and fall dead from its venom after taking 9 steps. Odin would be swallowed by Fenrir.
Freyr would die fighting Surt without his great sword, which he had given away for love. Most of the gods would die. Most of the world would burn. The seas would swallow the land. And then something remarkable. The earth would rise again from the water, green and renewed. 2 human survivors, hidden in the wood of the world tree, would emerge to repopulate the world. The surviving gods would meet and remember, and Balder, the beloved, would return from the dead to lead a new and better age. Ragnarok was not simply destruction, it was transformation, death and renewal, winter and spring. The Norse understood their universe as cyclical, not ending, but changing, not lost, but transformed. There is something profoundly comforting in this vision when you look at it in a certain light. The world ends, but something comes after, something new, something that could not have existed without the ending of what came before. The fire dies down to embers now. The darkness is very still. The world tree stands at the center of everything, its roots deep in the earth, its branches touching the sky. And somewhere in its branches, something is always beginning. As you rest now in the deep and peaceful dark, the stories settle around you like warm blankets. History whispers its oldest comfort. Everything passes, and something always comes after.
Chapter 10. Norse Society, Feasts, Sagas, and the Art of Memory. Time period, throughout the Viking Age. Key figure, the Skalds, Norse poets. Major event, the flowering of Norse literary and artistic culture. What was preserved? 1,000 years of memory. Let us rest here in a Norse longhouse on a winter evening. The fire in the central hearth burns high and bright. The smoke rises through a hole in the thatched roof, carrying with it the smell of pine wood and roasting meat. Around the fire, perhaps 30 people are seated. Men and women, old and young, children leaning against their parents, heavy with warmth and food, dogs lying close to the heat. The wind outside is fierce and cold, carrying snow, but in here, everything is warm and close, and full of the smell of people and fire and food. A man stands near the fire. He is the skald, the poet. His role in Norse society is as important as the warriors or the farmers. He is the keeper of memory, the one who turns events into words and words into forms that can be remembered and repeated across generations. Norse poetry is extraordinarily complex. It uses a system of alliteration and internal rhyme that requires exceptional skill to produce. It uses kennings, elaborate metaphorical compound words to describe the world obliquely and beautifully. The sea is the whale road. Gold is the fire of the sea. A sword is the wound snake. Blood is the sweat of the sword. The Skald's poems celebrated the deeds of great warriors and kings. They preserved the history of battles and voyages. They told the stories of the gods. They were memorized and recited and passed down through generations. In a culture without widespread literacy, the Skald was the library. The Norse people loved stories. The sagas, written down in Iceland beginning in the 12th and 13th centuries, preserve a tradition of oral storytelling that stretches back centuries further. They are remarkable texts,
clear and precise in their narration, unsentimental about violence and death, but full of psychological depth. Characters who feel entirely real, who make choices you understand even when you do not agree with them. The saga of Njal's Burning tells the story of a blood feud in Iceland that spirals inexorably toward tragedy. It is considered one of the great works of world literature. The saga of the Volsungs tells the story of the hero Sigurd, who kills the dragon Fafnir and wins the cursed treasure hoard. This story later inspired the German Nibelungenlied, and much later still, it inspired a young Oxford professor named J.R.R. Tolkien. When you read Tolkien's dragons, when you read his descriptions of rings of power and cursed treasure, and heroes facing impossible odds with quiet courage, you are reading the echo of a skald's voice by a Norse fire more than 1,000 years ago. The Norse people also expressed themselves in visual art. Their wood carving was extraordinary. Intricate knotwork patterns of interlacing animals and geometric forms covering everything from ship prows to furniture to jewelry. Their metalwork produced brooches and pendants and arm rings of remarkable beauty. They carved runes into stone, into wood, into weapons, into the sides of mountains. Rune stones were raised across Scandinavia to commemorate the dead, record significant events, mark territorial boundaries. They still stand today in fields and churchyards across Sweden and Denmark and Norway. Tall stones with their ancient inscriptions, weathered but legible, memory made permanent in stone. The fire in the longhouse is burning lower now. The skald has finished his poem. The children are asleep. The adults are quiet, staring into the embers. Outside, the wind has eased. The snow has stopped. And somewhere above the clouds, the stars are keeping their ancient watch. As your eyes grow heavy now, as your breathing slows, the old stories are still in the air around you, still warm from the fire, still alive in the telling. History holds you, and you rest.
Chapter 11. The Christianization of the Norse World. Time period 960 to 1100 AD. Key figure: King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway. Major event: the conversion of Scandinavia to Christianity. What was lost and gained? The old gods faded. A new world emerged. Change came slowly to the Norse world. For most of the Viking Age, the Norse people practiced their old religion. They worshipped Odin and Thor and Freya. They made sacrifices at the great temples. They told their stories and kept their traditions. But the world around them was changing. Every territory the Norse settled in Western Europe was Christian. England was Christian. France was Christian. Ireland was Christian. The Byzantine Empire was Christian. As Norse settlers became part of these societies, as they traded and married and built communities alongside Christian neighbors, Christianity inevitably flowed back toward Scandinavia. Individual Norse leaders converted for political reasons. A king who was Christian could deal more easily with Christian rulers elsewhere in Europe. A converted Norse leader was a more acceptable ally, a more trustworthy trading partner.
Harald Bluetooth, the King of Denmark, who united Denmark and claimed Norway around 958 to 986 AD, was baptized as a Christian. He raised a large rune stone at Jelling in Denmark that still stands today. It declares that Harald made the Danes Christian. The stone is sometimes called the birth certificate of Denmark. But conversion was not simply a top-down political process. It was also a gradual cultural absorption. Missionaries came to Scandinavia, learned the Norse language, built churches. The old gods were not forgotten overnight. They faded slowly, merging in some cases with Christian figures, surviving in place names and stories and the names of the days of the week. Tuesday is Tyr's Day. Wednesday is Odin's Day, Woden being the Anglo-Saxon name for Odin. Thursday is Thor's Day. Friday is Freya's Day. Every week, the old gods are remembered in their original names in languages derived from Norse and Anglo-Saxon. The conversion of Norway was particularly dramatic. King Olaf Tryggvason, who ruled from 995 to 1000 AD, converted with the fervor of the newly religious. He gave his subjects a stark choice: convert to Christianity or face the consequences. His methods of persuasion were, by modern standards, deeply troubling, but his campaign was effective. Norway was nominally Christian by the time of his death. Iceland converted around the year 1000 AD through a decision of the Althing. The Icelanders chose Christianity as a matter of political pragmatism to maintain their relationship with the Norwegian king. But they negotiated to retain some of their old practices privately. Eating horse meat, for instance, was a pagan practice, but was permitted to continue in Iceland long after the official conversion. The old gods did not disappear. They went underground, into the folk traditions, into the stories, into the poetry. The Eddas, the great collections of Norse mythology compiled in Iceland in the 13th century, were written down by Christian monks who recognized the value of preserving them. We know what we know about Odin and Thor and Freya because Christian scholars in Iceland chose to write it down. The irony is not lost. The temples fell quiet. The sacrifices stopped. The priests of the old gods became figures of memory rather than active practice. But the mythology survived and is still being told today. In every Thor movie, in every novel set in a Norse world, in every child who looks up and thinks for half a second of a hammer, the old gods are still there, faded but not gone, resting quietly in the stories, as you are resting now, quietly, deeply, in the long dark of this winter night. The church bells ring very far away. The old stones are silent. The stars are the same as they always were. We move forward into the final age of the Vikings. Chapter 12. The Norman Conquest. The last Viking victory. Time period 1066 AD. Key figure William the Conqueror. Major event the Battle of Hastings. What changed? England, and through England, the world. The year 1066 AD is one of the most significant in English history, and it is, in the deepest sense, a Viking story. We have already mentioned Rollo of Normandy, the Norse chieftain who accepted a grant of French territory in 911 AD. His great-great-great-great-grandson was William. Born illegitimate, the son of a Norman duke and a tanner's daughter, William had fought to defend and expand his duchy from childhood. He was tough, calculating, and absolutely determined. When the English king, Edward the Confessor, died childless in January 1066, 3 men claimed the English throne. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful English earl, who was crowned immediately after Edward's death. Harald Hardrada, the king of Norway, who claimed a right through an old treaty. And William of Normandy, who claimed that Edward had promised him the throne and that Harold had sworn an oath to support his claim. We have already seen what happened to Harald Hardrada. He sailed to Yorkshire with a large army, was met by Harold Godwinson at Stamford Bridge, and was defeated and killed. It was a decisive English victory. But Harold had barely finished celebrating when news arrived from the south. William had crossed the English Channel. He had landed at Pevensey on the Sussex coast. Harold force-marched his army south. They had just fought a major battle. They were tired, but Harold could not afford to wait. Every day William was in England, he was burning and plundering the countryside. On October 14th, 1066, the 2 armies met at a hill near Hastings. The English fought on foot, forming a shield wall at the top of the ridge. The Normans attacked with cavalry and archers. For most of the day, the English shield wall held. The Norman attacks broke again and again on the wall of English shields. Then something went wrong. Whether by accident or design, part of the Norman cavalry retreated. Some of the English defenders broke from the shield wall to pursue them. The Normans turned, and the exposed English soldiers were cut down. The shield wall was compromised. The Norman attacks intensified. Late in the afternoon, an arrow struck King Harold. Whether it struck him in the eye, as shown in the Bayeux Tapestry, is debated, but Harold fell, and with him fell Anglo-Saxon England. William was crowned King of England on Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey. He is known to history as William the Conqueror. The Norman conquest transformed England. The English aristocracy was almost entirely replaced by Normans. The English language absorbed thousands of French words, fundamentally changing its character. English common law was reorganized. The great stone castles that still dot the English landscape were built by the Normans. The English church was reorganized along Norman lines. The very name England remained, but almost everything else changed. And William the Conqueror, the man who made it happen, was the great-great-great-great-grandson of a Norse chieftain who had arrived in France on a longship. The last great act of the Viking Age was also its most lasting. The Normans did not call themselves Vikings. They spoke French and built stone cathedrals and thought of themselves as French noblemen. But their blood was Norse. Their names were Norse. Their energy, their ambition, their willingness to sail across water and take what they found worth taking, that was Norse too. The battle is over now. The field is quiet. The stars above Hastings are very bright. The autumn air smells of wood smoke and turned earth. England is changed forever, and the last echo of the Viking Age settles slowly into the soil, as you settle now, deeply and completely, into the warmth of your resting place.
Chapter 13. The Greenland Mystery, a colony lost to time. Time period, 985 to 1408 AD. Key figure, the Norse Greenland settlers. Major event, the disappearance of the Norse Greenland colonies. What was lost? An entire civilization, slowly. There is a mystery in the history of the Viking Age that has never been fully solved. A mystery that is, in its own quiet way, as haunting as any raid. The Norse colonies in Greenland. Eric the Red established the first settlements in Greenland around 985 AD. At their height, the colonies contained perhaps 4,000 to 5,000 people living in two main settlements on the southwestern and eastern coasts. They built stone and turf houses. They raised cattle and sheep. They hunted walrus and narwhal for ivory and rope. They maintained regular contact with Iceland and Norway, sending ships south with furs and ivory and live polar bears, which were highly prized at European courts. For nearly 500 years, these colonies survived. Through the long winters when the sea froze and the ships could not come. Through periods of famine when the grass failed and the animals died. Through contact with the Inuit people, the original inhabitants of Greenland, whom they called Skrælings. Through all of this, they held on. And then, gradually, they disappeared. The western settlement, the smaller of the two colonies, was abandoned sometime in the mid-14th century. When a Norwegian priest visited in the 1340s, he found no people. Only cattle and sheep wandering without owners. The eastern settlement lasted longer. The last written record of it dates from 1408, recording a wedding in the church at Walsey, a perfectly ordinary event, a wedding, and then silence. What happened to the Norse Greenlanders? Historians have debated this question for centuries. The climate change explanation is significant. The medieval warm period that had made Greenland habitable began to end in the 14th century. The Little Ice Age brought colder temperatures, shorter growing seasons, advancing ice. The walrus ivory trade, which had been the economic foundation of the colonies, collapsed when elephant ivory from Africa flooded European markets. The Black Death killed a third of Europe's population in the 1440s, disrupting the trade networks the colonies depended on. Relations with the Inuit people may have deteriorated. The Inuit were better adapted to the changing conditions. The Norse, committed to their European way of farming and livestock keeping, could not adapt as quickly. Perhaps some colonists left on the last ships. Perhaps some were absorbed into Inuit communities. Perhaps some simply died, one by one, in their cold stone houses, with no ships coming and no hope of rescue. We do not know. We may never know. The empty church at Walsey still stands. Its stone walls still reach toward the gray Greenland sky. The carved doorway is still intact. The grass grows around it in summer, and the snow covers it in winter. And inside there is nothing, only light and silence, and the memory of a community that held on for 500 years in one of the harshest environments on Earth, and then let go. The Greenland wind moves through the empty church tonight. It is cold and very clean. The stars above the ice cap
are hard and bright. And somewhere, in the silence between snowflakes, the last Norse Greenlanders are still holding on, still waiting for the ships that never came. We honor them with our remembering, and we rest as they finally rested after all those long, cold years.
Chapter 14. The Legacy of the Vikings. What they left behind. Time period: 1100 AD to the present. Key figure: the Norse people as a whole. Major event: the end of the Viking Age and its lasting effects. What survived? Almost everything that mattered. The Viking Age is traditionally said to have ended in 1066 AD, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the last great Viking invasion of England, defeated by Harold Godwinson. 3 weeks later, the Norman conquest began. And the Normans, though Norse in origin, were no longer Vikings in any meaningful sense. The age of the longships and the raids was over. Scandinavia was Christian. The political structures that had driven young men onto the sea in search of silver and glory were changing. The kingdoms of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark were consolidating, becoming more centralized, more European in character. The energy that had sent warriors to England and Ireland and Russia and Constantinople was being absorbed into the structures of the medieval European world. But the legacy the Norse people left behind was enormous, perhaps larger than any other people of comparable size in medieval history. In language, the English language contains thousands of words of Norse origin: egg, knife, window, husband, ugly, happy, skin, skull, wing, anger, cake. These are Norse words, common everyday words that went into the English language during the Danelaw period and stayed there permanently. The very grammar of English was simplified, made less inflected during the period of contact between Norse and Anglo-Saxon speakers. Modern English owes more to the Viking Age than most people realize. In place names. Across England, Ireland, Scotland, France, and Russia, Norse place names mark the landscape. Every by, thorp, wick, gate in northern England. Normandy itself. Rus, the root of Russia and Ukraine. Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, Limerick, all Norse foundations. In law and governance, the Norse tradition of the Thing, the assembly of free men, influenced the development of democratic institutions in Iceland, which has the oldest parliament in the world still in continuous existence. In exploration, the Norse were the first Europeans to reach North America. They pioneered navigation techniques that would influence European exploration for centuries. They demonstrated that the open ocean could be crossed and recrossed reliably. In literature, the Norse sagas are among the great literary achievements of the medieval world. They directly influenced Tolkien, who directly influenced virtually every fantasy writer working today. When you read about dragons guarding gold, about rings of power, about heroes sailing into unknown waters, you are reading the echo of Norse stories told by firelight more than 1,000 years ago. In art, Norse knotwork and interlace patterns appear in the art of every culture the Norse touched. They appear in Irish illuminated manuscripts, in Anglo-Saxon jewelry, in the carved wooden stave churches of Norway, in tattoo art around the world today. In mythology, the Norse gods live on, in the names of the days,
in Marvel movies, in the imagination of every child who has heard the name of Thor, in the word berserk from the Norse warriors called berserkers who fought in a battle trance, in the word ransack from the Norse word ransaka, to search a house, in the word slaughter from the Norse word slaughter. The Norse people are still speaking to us through our words and our stories and our names and our laws and our maps, through the empty church in Greenland and the ruins at Lonso Meadows, and the rune stones in Swedish fields and the Oseberg ship in its Oslo museum. They are still here, still speaking, if we are quiet enough to hear them. The long ships are gone. The gods are quiet. The skalds have laid down their harps. But the words remain. And in the words, the people. And in the people, the age. Still alive, still sailing, on the dark water of history. As you drift now on your own dark water, warm and safe and carried.
Chapter 15. The Everyday Viking. Life Between the Raids. Time period 793 to 1100 AD. Key figure: ordinary Norse men and women. Major event: daily life in the Viking Age. What was lived? The real heart of the era. We have sailed far together tonight. We have crossed oceans and fought battles and raised runic stones over the graves of the dead. We have watched empires form and kings rise and fall, and gods walk through the stories of a people who are gone but not forgotten. But now, in this quiet hour before sleep takes you fully, let us come back to something smaller, something closer. Let us look at the everyday life of an ordinary Norse person, not a king or a jarl or a famous explorer, just a person living their life in a longhouse on the edge of a fjord in the 9th century. The longhouse is the center of Norse life. It is long and narrow, built of wood and turf. The walls are thick and the roof is low, designed to hold heat in the long winters. Inside, a central fire burns all day and night. The smoke finds its way out through the hole in the roof. The floor is beaten earth covered with rushes. Along the long walls are raised sleeping platforms where the family sleeps close together for warmth. The animals, cattle and sheep and pigs, are kept in the far end of the longhouse during the worst of the winter. Their body heat adds to the warmth of the building. In the morning, before dawn in winter, the women of the household rise first. They stoke the fire. They heat water. They begin the tasks of the day. Norse women ran the household with absolute authority. They held the keys of the house, literally, on a ring at their belt. These keys were symbols of their power and status. When a woman died, her keys were buried with her. The main meal of a Norse day was porridge, oatmeal or barley porridge, sometimes with dried fruit or honey if available. Bread was baked on flat stones by the fire. Fish was eaten frequently, dried or smoked or fresh. Meat was eaten when animals were slaughtered, usually in autumn before the worst of the winter. Dairy products were important. Cheese and skyr, a thick fermented dairy product still eaten in Iceland today, provided protein through the long months when fresh food was scarce. Ale and mead were drunk by everyone, including children.
The water was often not safe to drink untreated, and the fermentation process made drinks safer. Norse people were, by the standards of their time and compared to many contemporary cultures, an unusually clean. They bathed weekly. In fact, the Old Norse word for Saturday, laugardag, means washing day. They used combs, tweezers, and ear spoons. They cleaned their teeth with wooden sticks. Historical accounts from Muslim travelers who encountered Norse traders in Russia noted with some surprise that they kept themselves clean, though these travelers had their own standards that led them to other criticisms. Norse children played with wooden toys, small carved horses and boats, dolls made of cloth. They played board games, including a strategy game called Hnefatafl, a precursor of chess. They learned to swim and ride horses and handle boats from a young age. They listened to their parents' and grandparents' stories by firelight, stories of the gods and heroes, stories of their ancestors and their deeds, stories of the great wide world beyond the fjord. A Norse person of the 9th century could reasonably expect to live to their 40s or 50s if they survived childhood. Childhood mortality was high, but those who survived into adulthood often lived fully and richly. They worked hard, they played hard, they loved fiercely, they mourned deeply, they held grudges with patience and loyalty with equal patience. They valued honesty and skill and courage. They feared being remembered badly more than they feared death, because they understood that what mattered was not how long you lived, but how you were remembered. The skald would speak your name, the rune stone would carry your deeds, the story would go on, and going on was everything. The fire in the long house is very low now, just embers, glowing soft orange in the dark. The family is asleep around it, breathing slowly. The animals shift quietly at the far end of the house. Outside, the fjord is still. The stars are reflected in the black water, and the night holds everything it holds with equal, silent care. You are part of that night now, warm and still, and breathing slowly. The old world rests around you, and so do you.
Chapter 16, Ragnarok and Renewal, the end of the Viking Age. Time period, 1000 to 1100 AD. Key figure, the Norse world as a whole. Major event, the slow ending of the Viking Age. What passed? An age of fire and sea and story. Everything ends. This is perhaps the deepest truth the Norse people understood. They built it into their mythology. They made it the centerpiece of their vision of the universe. Ragnarok, the inevitable ending, and what comes after. The Viking Age ended not with a single dramatic event, but with a gradual change. The conversion to Christianity changed the culture from within. The centralization of Scandinavian kingdoms reduced the opportunities for independent raiding. The coastal defenses of England and France improved. The easy targets had been hit and fortified. The trade networks that had driven Norse expansion continued, but through different channels. Norse merchants became European merchants, indistinguishable from their trading partners. Norse settlers in England and Ireland and France and Russia became English and Irish and French and Russian, losing their distinct Norse identity within a few generations. The language faded. The old gods retreated into stories. The longships were still built,
but they carried goods now more often than warriors. The age of the raid was over, and something new was coming. Scandinavia was becoming part of Europe. Its kings were Christian monarchs with royal courts and stone castles and Latin scribes. Its merchants were trading partners with the Hanseatic League. Its churches were filled with the same prayers as churches across the continent. The transformation was complete. The Viking Age was over. But its legacy was written everywhere, in the English language, in the coastlines of Britain and Ireland, in the legal traditions of Iceland, in the foundation myths of Russia, in the stones of Normandy, in the empty church at Walsey, Greenland, in the ruins at Losso Meadows, Newfoundland, in the words we use every day without knowing where they came from. The Norse people had crossed every ocean they knew to them. They had found new lands and old trades. They had fought and built and loved and lost. They had told their stories with extraordinary care, making sure the words would survive even when the people were gone. And the words did survive. They are here now, in this story, being told to you across 1,000 years. The skald's voice carried across time. The fire in the longhouse still burning to its last embers. They glow softly in the darkness, orange and deep red, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat, like your heartbeat. The sound of the sea is very far away tonight, just the faintest suggestion of waves, slow and rhythmic and ancient, moving as they have always moved, as they will always move. The Norse people who once sailed those seas are gone now. Their longships are buried or rotted or preserved in museums. Their gods are quiet. Their language has changed beyond recognition. But the stars they navigated by are still there. Look up in your mind's eye and see them. The same stars that guided Leif Erikson across the Atlantic. The same stars that the Varangians watched from the walls of Constantinople. The same stars above the empty church at Walsey, Greenland. Above the ruins at Losso Meadows, Newfoundland. Above the rune stones in their Swedish fields. Above you tonight. The same ones, still in their courses, still keeping their ancient watch. The Viking Age is over, but its stories are not over. They live in the words we speak, in the places we call by Norse names, in the days of the week that carry the names of the old gods, in every story of adventure and courage and the willingness to sail toward the unknown. Those stories are part of you now. They traveled from a Norse fire to your ears tonight, across 1,000 years, without losing their warmth. You are resting now, completely resting. The longship has reached its harbor. The sail is furled. The oars are shipped. The crew sleeps. And the sea moves very quietly all around, dark and ancient and full of stories. The Norse world sleeps tonight. The fjords are still. The stars are watching. And so, quietly and peacefully and completely, do you. Good night.